It's quirky because this guy's quirky. Mashes a bunch of eclectic moods and ideas together into an awesome sauce because this guy... So what the freak is going on here, right? Why is it so relaxed? What are these calm blue tones? What's with this slow grounded delivery? I was promised non-stop gore and blood and tits and also boobies. Did I lie about Fujimoto being a weirdo? No, he manages a Twitter account where he impersonates his little sister. Yeah, he's a weirdo. Not to mention, if I told you, there's this really good anime, right, where that there's this guy and he can turn into a chainsaw. It's really good, I promise. You'd be like, you know what? I'll take your word for it, because you're like really cool and always right and like really cool. But what kind of B-movie ass concept is this? Chainsaw Man, by nature, is kind of goofy and campy. For sure, there's stuff in here that'll make you want to cry and shit your pants and whatnot, but like, the dude's a chainsaw, let's be real. There's a constant tonal chaos that makes everything kind of uncertain and frantic, and that serves as a core tenet for Fujimoto's Chainsaw Man. But this adaptation, for the most part, kind of plays it straight. It goes for a relatively sober take on Fujimoto's material. Probably an easy example of this is in the second episode, or I guess not in the second episode, because they removed the whole fight. Denji was supposed to get his udon interrupted by the muscle devil for like 5 pages, but instead he just passes out on Makima's Bahangur. Just definitely works in keeping to the single track philosophy that the adaptation is working under, as opposed to the train crash style pacing of Fujimoto, but is this ideal? Did Big M ruin Chainsaw Man? Well, first I want to highlight the why. If you watched my last video, here's another replay. Anime can't just be boiled down to the studio's name? What?
You know that I like reminding people that there are people behind anime. Now, I would like to start pointing my finger at some of these people, but I'm actually going to stall even more and go on a little side tangent about why Chainsaw Man is kind of a special case in the industry. Usually there's a production committee behind every anime, with multiple companies pitching in their money to split the financial risk of the project and taking on specific roles that are necessary in order to produce a show successfully. Anime studios usually rank pretty low on these committees in terms of like money investment, and so they can sometimes be subjected to requests from, say, the publisher of the source material. This can range from creative decisions, which could be fine or bad, to scheduling decisions, which are almost always bad. So while there are pros and cons to having a committee, ultimately there are very few companies that can actually take on the full risk and responsibilities of an anime project alone. But MAPPA, seeing all of you on Twitter proving every day that Freud was right, decided to make possibly the safest possible bet for a solo investment in the current climate and took on Shanghai themselves. The benefits being, of course, they are getting paid if this shit pops off. And more importantly for the anime itself, they don't have any external producers breathing their necks about, well, anything. This meant that MAPPA could just let the creatives create in peace to make the best Chainsaw Man that they can make. I'm gonna be honest, I don't really know why I even got to this point. The industry kind of just commits self-sabotage for fun. But I'm not here to talk about this. Really, the only part I'm taking from this detour is the creative freedom. Because even if for some, this can all seem like a corporate, soulless adaptation of Shanghai Man, it may be more accurate to say that Sesshomo found a director whose creative vision so happens to align with his, safe intentions. And that director is Ryu Nakayama. Who? This is this guy's first series directorial position, and it's for Chainsaw Man, an incredibly important property being used as MAPPA's solo committee gamble. Sure, he's got a MAPPA-friendly vision, but we have to be missing something, right? Well, for starters, he's one of the breakouts from the second generation of webgen animators. What's webgen, you ask? Boy, do I have a video for you.
First wave of webgen talent. These animators said, fuck it, I don't need traditional training, let's just raw dog this shit and post my work on Twitter. Eventually, the industry would take notice and say, gadzooks, that animation was busted.
If I keep up this pace in like 5 videos time, I'll never have to do voiceovers again. Nakayama, as an animator, focuses on action and action effects, and his work looks great. But so what? Who cares? Well, it proves that he's served his time in the trenches, and I mean, it never hurts to have a fundamentally good animator as a director. He's also shown a glimpse of his potential as a director, but is this glimpse really enough for a full directorial role? Maybe, if it wasn't Chainsaw Man. But it is Chainsaw Man. Nakayama by himself has an impressive resume to gradually transition into eventually directing a show like Chainsaw Man, but probably not enough to lead a project of this caliber right out of the gate. But if you can believe it, anime isn't a solo effort, and Nakayama, being an exciting webgen star, has a lot of friends. Talented friends. You guys can make fun of Soul Eater all you want, but anime really is about the power of friendship. It cannot be understated how important it is in a modern anime environment, especially, to have talented connections, when there are so many promising productions doing their utmost to throw up as much sakuga onto the screen as possible. And the way the industry works, the more talent your production has, the more talent it will attract. So maybe now it's a bit clearer why Nakayama was chosen for this role.
Going back to his vision though, what did he have in mind for Chainsaw Man's adaptation? Now, I mentioned a bit ago that Fujimoto just adds this slightly unhinged touch to CSM that makes it kind of hard to pinpoint how you should feel at any given time. But if that sounds vague, I don't blame you, it is. It's hard to describe, and so of course, it'd be even harder to adapt. So Nakayama thought, what if you just don't? The interesting thing about CSM is that because it's such a mismatch of ideas clashing constantly, there is leeway for adaptations that take particular aspects of it and refine those to become the core of the adaptation. In Nakayama's case, he was drawn to the live action influences that are all over Chainsaw Man, and believed in the potential for a Chainsaw Man anime that doesn't feel like an anime. To this end, the detailed designs, the muted colors, the thorough animation, all of it was to make cinema out of animation. In this way, Nakayama wanted to create the most accessible Chainsaw Man possible, so that even those that don't watch anime can enjoy Fujimoto's wild ride. In other words, this adaptation was geared to be attractive to the Tarantino heads. And it worked too, judging by the number of complaints I saw about Mappa not showing Power's feet. So yeah, there was an actual fleshed out creative vision behind the project. Once I accepted that it just wasn't going to be very Fujimoto-like, I started looking for how well it delivered on his promise, cause if it could do that, I'd still have fun with it. Ideally, every scene would have that grounded and effortless coolness of the sex of Western cinema that Nakayama is emulating. I think they delivered on the cool pretty consistently, but the effortless? That's actually not an effortless thing to do. Apart from the more directorial stuff, it also just takes a lot of raw animation power to make a scene feel realistically seamless. Maybe this is kind of a given, but Nakayama's Chainsaw Man really shines in what few original scenes there are in the show. I'm talking about like Aki's Morning or Himeno's Night, both very, very strong sequences, and both very quiet scenes, because that's what the adaptation excels at. But perhaps more impressive is when Nakayama's vision is matched not only in adapted sequences, but adapted to action sequences, since, by elimination, this is where it most often struggles. Gosto's episode 8 is absolutely my favorite episode for this reason. Not only does it have that really good original portion, it follows that up with an extended cut of an already quiet and brooding part of the manga where Ushio comes in with this fucking... But after that, we get into the real shit. Aki's awkward run up here is really representative of what I wanted to see. The action is sleek and grounded in a way that actually feels like a true departure and valid alternative to Fujimoto's crazy picturesque violence. Like, this instant vanishing of the snake demon is so jarring, but I really like it, because it's cool and fits Nakayama's vision more than a traditional exit with a blast of anime effects. Unfortunately, not every episode can be storyboarded by Goso. But as I said before, the original content is good. If the team wanted to push the adaptation further, maybe instead of sticking to Fujimoto's script and trying to work around that, they would have had an easier time if they just massaged the show with more quiet character moments. I mean, I get the reluctance. It'd be like defacing the Bible. But it's not the Bible, and Fujimoto will be the first one to tell you that. Overall though, I had a good time with it, and at the very least, Nakayama accomplished his goal of introducing Fujimoto's wackiness to the mainstream, and I thank him for that, because that means I get to farm Chainsaw Man for views. For the other parts of Fujimoto's creative identity, the openings and endings almost make up for the absence in the show itself. Honestly, they tease Reze, and that's all I really needed out of this. So I'm satisfied. But all this talk brings up a larger question, right? What makes a good adaptation? I think I probably answered this in all that rambling I just did. Maybe. The easy answer is that it's subjective. But that's boring, so let's go a bit more concrete and say faithful. What's a faithful adaptation? I think there are two parts to consider with this, the content and the feel. CSM, as I said, is pretty faithful in its content. Visually too, there's some frames that look like they were pulled straight from the manga. But what about feel? The look is related to the feel, I suppose, but when I say feel, I mean everything that isn't explicitly described in the panels of the manga. And this is why the one-to-one adaptation is kind of a myth. What a one-to-one adaptation actually means is going to be very subjective and based on all the stuff that, while reading, you make up. I'm talking color, voice acting, the content between the panels. To be faithful in feel isn't a mechanical matter, it's creative. That's what it means to be an adaptation to a different medium. There's gonna be some gaps you need to fill with your creative juices. Nope. If a production is going for faithful, they gotta pull some widely accepted reading of the source. So, like in CSM's case, definitely not how I consume CSM in my mind, but its somber live actionness isn't out of left field either. I say that, but this reading does cause some clashes with the content. But in the end, it's safer to keep the content intact rather than the feel. And because of that, this adaptation will appease most people with its faithfulness. Which is fine, but oh, how I wish there was a timely adaptation that I could use to demonstrate the effect that a well-realized feel can have, especially by being malleable with the content. An adaptation that's so good, it would theoretically be the best in the season, maybe? Or even the best adaptation of the year? Or actually just since 2010, is there anything like that? You know, my plan was to abuse Chainsaw Man again to talk about some other more obscure thing, but it really seems like that wasn't even necessary this time around. My bad, Chainsaw Man, I'll stop. until season 2.
Hashtag Bocce the goat. Hashtag Bocce the goat.
This anime is really good. Right off the bat though, on the surface, Bocchi the Rock shares many similarities with K-On! They are both 4 comas, serialized in Kirara, focusing on the slice of life adventures of high school girls in bands, adapted into TV-length series. Like, come on. And the team knew this too. They knew that they had really big shoes to fill to not be seen as yet another K-On! Clone. It's really not, but it had me fooled when I first saw the announcement for this project. So, while Chainsaw Man could afford to not be as committed to its adaptation's vision because it already got and wants to keep that Fujimoto street cred, Bocchi the Rock, being relatively obscure and K-On! Adjacent, really had to break out with a statement. And they did that. That was a blood-curdling screech, courtesy of Bocchi going to cyberpsychosis. And there's a lot of that in the show. Not the screeching specifically, but just, I guess, commitment to the bit. The animators, and as seen or heard, the voice actors too, all have an acute understanding of the already inherently funny gags in the source material, and they crank everything up to 11 to deliver these jokes to their full potential. It's a show that makes its strengths incredibly apparent, which is how it's garnered so much mass appeal. There are so many attempts at creative, experimental, sometimes not even animated ideas that constantly poke at or just ignore entirely the conventional rules of TV anime. Like, there's Bocchi trying to prematurely end the show on a bi-weekly basis, or that one sequence where they built a whole ass Zoetrope for a 5-second gag, or this sequence where they huck a 3D render of Bocchi against a wall of cubes because, I'm lost on this one. The point is, there's a lot of these. Any one of these cuts in a normal production would be the, hey, remember that one weird scene in the footnotes of your thoughts? But somehow these scenes just became the norm for Bocchi Rock. Usually I would praise these experimental cuts as smart ways to save time in a project, and Bocchi could have used that, but I'm less than convinced that there's actually much time saving going on here given how elaborate some of these setups are. All of this, by the way, without dropping a beat when it comes to the sometimes incredibly slow, but still present, and well-written growth of its deceptively archetypical characters. I really respect the grounded approach to the relationships because, like, they're not even especially close friends. Heck, they just forgot about Bocchi for an entire summer. There's a lot of room for growth, and they show that growth constantly, but their ace in the sleeve to deliver and present important developments are the incredible, live-action referenced, fully 2D animated performances. This is by far the best attempt I've seen at mixing comedy and narrative ever, really. And it's necessary too because they prop each other up. There are quiet reflective moments, and apart from their direct purpose, they also help to break from and contrast the sections that just fire on all cylinders. But there's also a ton of characterization that is achieved through the humor itself. And this is such a natural and elegant way for, you know, a comedy show to handle developing its characters. Especially when it feels so invisible because you're too busy looking at footage of Japanese dams. And in the other direction, the growth of the cast keeps the comedy fresh. I was worried about the show for a while because it would be incredibly easy for the gags, which primarily focus on Bocchi's complete ineptitude to do much of anything really, to get stale. But there are two things that keep that from happening. The commitment to the bit, of course, but also the characters themselves that progressively change for the sake of creating fresh, equally funny hijinks. There's Bocchi, since she does gradually show the aptitude to do normal human being things, but there's a phenomenon really like in the show where every character is initially shocked by Bocchi's mandatory 2 deaths per episode, but they eventually adapt, and there's moments where you'll have every character just talking and progressing the show while passively reviving Bocchi because they, just like us, are used to it. And these considerations to the balance of the series is exactly what Keiichiro Saito, the director, sought out to preserve and expand on in his adaptation. But if we're talking about impact, there's someone else we really need to give credit for, and it's the character designer, Keroriya. The character designer. I like the designs too, Halo, but is he really as important as the director? Shut up, viewer! I'm getting to that. Keroriya was the person who actually kickstarted the project in the first place. He was an avid fan of the manga, so he asked Cloverworks producer Shota Umehara if there was any chance of a Bocchi adaptation, because he really wanted to be in it. Luckily, there was, and so he became the character designer. And his designs, once simplified on Saito's request, are very charming and animatable and reminiscent of Hamaji's more matured style that she graduated into. But he was much more than just a character designer. For one, he's the one who suggested a great director like Saito in the first place, and probably explained the appeal of Bocchi Rock given that neither Umehara or Saito had read it at that time. And on a more pragmatic level, Keroriya also took on the chief animation director role. This specific role combo is actually a pretty common and also good idea, because this role involves checking animation so that the characters move like intended. And who better to do that than the dude who made the characters? But this role acts like a double checker to the specific episode's animation director. So obviously that's not enough for this psycho.
So he decides to be the episode animation director too for like half the series. But that's still mostly just correcting other people's key animation. This whole correcting thing isn't very efficient, he thought in the inhuman mind of his. What if I just did it myself? And so he did. A lot of that. Like 2 episodes worth of that. That is insane. Let me repeat. This guy is insane. He might have been the reason why this production was able to charge past the finish line relatively unscathed, despite taking on so many crazy ideas and having multiple intricate performances and being on a pretty tight schedule. Not to mention his image for this adaptation colored the entire production just by sheer volume of his work, giving everybody else solid reference points for what this adaptation should strive to be. Which, sure, I guess is one way to reduce the amount of correcting you have to do. I felt like I just had to point that out, but to get back on topic, adaptations. We should probably talk about the source a bit. Bochi's Roku is in a 4-coma format, and that's fine. Or was fine until this anime came out. Only in retrospect does it feel like a lot of potential has been locked away because of the format. I feel like the charm of the 4-coma format is in its simplicity, so it's perfect for short, disjointed mimetic works. But Bocchi the Rock is kind of involved, so especially after this anime, I'm not convinced that it can be the best version of itself as a 4-coma. Like even just the dialogue, look at how many text bubbles there are. At this point, the most you can include in a panel is like 1 or 2 faces. Now if you're a particularly observant viewer, you'll notice that the anime doesn't have any text bubbles. There's enough room now to really experiment with fun, meaningful layouts, and also include more visual and spatial gags. Converting a 4-coma to an anime isn't easy though, so I also wanted to show appreciation for the work of Erika Yoshida, the scriptwriter. Filling out the script naturally so that its 4-coma roots wouldn't show is hard and quiet work that can only be noticed as good work because it's not noticed. But I did notice it, which means I don't know what that means. She retained and built upon a lot of the original charm of Hamaji's writing, but even when she does change the material, it's very elegant, much like Bocchi the Rock's idea of what an English YouTube comment is, and also as elegant as this transition into the outro. This anime was wonderful. The production is vast, fearless, nuanced. Whoa, it's me. What? You thought it was the end, but it wasn't. It's like a Bocchi fake out thing. Anyways, thanks and Merry Christmas, Merry New Year, Merry National Bubble Bath Day. I got a new mic. Tell me it sounds better. Please tell me it sounds better, because that was a lot of money when I probably should have just enunciated better.